The whip screamed through the air, not toward the mountain man bound to the post, toward the woman who threw herself between them. 220 pounds of flesh they had mocked her entire life, now a shield of iron. The leather tore through her back. She shrieked, blood mixed with his blood in the Wyoming dirt. The crowd went silent. They did not know what they had done. They did not know they had just awakened a beast that once killed 47 men in a single night. The sound of a bullwhip cutting through air is not a crack. It is a scream. Wyoming Territory. October 1874. 300 souls stood witness as a woman bled into the dirt for a man she had never met before that week. But they did not know what they had done. They did not know they had just awakened a beast that once killed 47 men in a single night. Why would a woman scorned by an entire town throw herself in front of a whip meant for a stranger? The answer lies buried in a secret 15 years old. A secret connecting 3 families, 1 massacre, and a decision no man should ever have to make. This is the story of loyalty stronger than iron, of a man learning to love after losing everything, of the reason people still whisper the names Ezra Thorne and Mattie Hayes beneath the Wyoming moon. This is the story Fort Laramie tried to forget. Until today. 3 days earlier, Fort Laramie sat at the edge of civilization like a man clinging to a cliff. 800 souls pressed between the wild country and what they called progress. The autumn wind already carried the bite of winter coming down from the mountains. Yellow leaves tumbled through muddy streets. The smell of wood smoke and horse dung hung permanent in the air. 5 payroll wagon robberies in 3 months. The town lived in a state of quiet panic. Men checked their rifles twice before bed. Women hurried home before sunset. Children no longer played past the edge of town. Mayor Harrison Sterling controlled Fort Laramie like a puppeteer working strings. The bank, the saloon, the contracts with Union Pacific Railway, all of it ran through his hands. At 55 years old, Sterling had the face of a dried apple and the morals of a rattlesnake. He wore expensive suits tailored in Cheyenne. He smiled when he spoke, but his eyes never smiled with his mouth. The town did not know their mayor was the wolf they feared. The robberies were his own operation, a way to drain the town treasury slowly while blaming faceless bandits. The people looked to Sterling for protection. They did not see the predator wearing their shepherd's coat. Mattie Hayes knew about predators. She had been prey her entire life, 24 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, 220 pounds of flesh the delicate society ladies found offensive. She worked the back room of Hayes General Store, hauling sacks of flour that grown men struggled with. Her apron stayed permanently dusted white. Her hands stayed red and chapped from rope and wood and weight. The morning Wade Sterling and his friends found her unloading the supply wagon. Mattie was thinking about her mother. 14 years gone. The memory fading like old photographs. But the loneliness never faded. Careful there, Mattie. Heavy load coming through. Wade Sterling leaned against the hitching post with his sycophants arranged around him like a bad hand of cards. 22 years old, blonde hair pomaded back, expensive felt hat, manicured hands that had never done real work. He did not mean the flour sack. He meant her body. He always meant her body. Mattie kept her eyes on the boardwalk planks. She had learned long ago that silence was the only armor that did not rust. If she spoke back, she was hysterical. If she cried, she was pathetic. If she ignored them, she was stupid. There was no winning, only enduring. Leave her be, Wade. Joseph Hayes stepped from the store, 58 years old, kind eyes set in a face carved by grief. He had been a soldier once, a man who stood straight and spoke with authority. But that man died the night his wife did. What remained was a hollow shell, a father who loved his daughter but could not protect her, not from Wade Sterling, not from anyone whose name was Sterling, just having fun, Mr. Hayes. Wade tipped his expensive hat, just wondering how many horses it takes to get Mattie to church on Sunday. The laughter that followed was a familiar soundtrack. Mattie hefted the 50-pound sack onto the wagon. The wood groaned. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. not from exertion, from the burning shame that lived under her skin like a second skeleton. She was the fat girl of Fort Laramie, a spectacle, a joke, a cautionary tale mothers told their daughters about eating too much pie. But Mattie Hayes was not weak. She carried more than flour and shame. She carried the weight of a secret her father made her swear never to tell, a secret about the night her mother died, about the men who killed her, about why Joseph Hayes never went to the law. That weight was heavier than any flour sack, and it was about to get heavier still. The atmosphere in Fort Laramie changed the day the mountain man rode in. Late October, the wind already carrying prophecy of the hard winter ahead. The stranger came on a massive roan gelding that looked half wild, much like its rider. The man was wrapped in buffalo furs and worn buckskin that looked like they had seen the other side of the Rockies and back. His beard was thick, streaked with early gray despite his age. His eyes were the color of cold river stones, gray and flat and patient, the eyes of something that had learned to wait. He did not ride to the saloon like most drifters. He rode straight to the blacksmith, dismounted with a heavy thud that spoke of dense muscle and old injuries. He pulled a long bundle from his saddle, a rifle wrapped in oilcloth. Mattie was sweeping the boardwalk, making herself invisible as usual. She watched the stranger walk past. He was huge, not just tall, dense, built like an old oak tree that had weathered 100 storms. People stepped out of his way instinctively, the way animals move aside when the alpha passes. He smelled of pine resin, old leather, dried blood, wood smoke, the smell of high country where the air was too thin for lies. As he passed, Mattie Wade Sterling stepped out of the saloon, emboldened by midday whiskey, looking for a reaction to impress the barmaids watching from the window. He bumped into the stranger, on purpose. Watch it, savage. The mountain man stopped. He did not turn his whole body, just his head, slow, deliberate. He looked at Wade Sterling. Then his eyes slid to Mattie clutching her broom, terrified of the violence brewing in the air like a summer thunderstorm. For a second the stranger's gaze lingered on Mattie. There was no mockery in it, no disgust, no pity, just a flat, assessing look, like a wolf checking the wind before deciding whether to hunt or pass by. Then he looked back at Wade Sterling, said absolutely nothing, and kept walking. Wade stood there, robbed of his confrontation, looking foolish in front of the barmaids. He turned his anger on the easiest target, kicked dirt near Mattie's feet, sent dust onto her clean apron. "What are you staring at, cow? Get back inside." Mattie hurried through the door, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner against bars. For the first time in years, a man had looked at her and had not laughed, had not sneered, had not looked through her like she was furniture. He had looked at her like she was real. Inside the blacksmith shop, Gus Brennan stood at his forge, 52 years old, barrel chest, arms thick as fence posts, scars from Fort Sumter still visible when he rolled up his sleeves. He was hammering a horseshoe into shape when the door opened. When he looked up and saw who stood there, the hammer slipped from his fingers, clattered on the stone floor. Jesus Christ! Ezra Thorne! I thought you were dead. The stranger set his rifle bundle on the workbench. Still alive, Gus. Need you to fix the firing pin on this Sharps. Gus Brennan's hands shook as he unwrapped the oilcloth. The rifle was a Sharps buffalo gun, .50 caliber, heavy enough to drop a bull elk at 500 yards. Or a man. The firing pin was cracked, a delicate repair that required steady hands. But Gus's hands were not steady, because he knew who Ezra Thorne was, what Ezra Thorne had done. "You should not be here," Gus whispered. His eyes darted to the door. "If they find out who you are, if Sterling knows you are here, Sterling will not know." Ezra's voice was gravel, unused to conversation. "I just need the rifle fixed. Supplies. Then I am gone." Gus picked up the rifle. His jaw worked. "You saved my life, Ezra. Fort Kearney. You pulled me out when the canyon collapsed. I owe you. But if Sterling finds out, he will not find out." Gus Brennan knew a secret about Ezra Thorne, a secret that if the townspeople discovered they would hang Ezra from the nearest tree without trial. But Gus owed this man his life, from a night at Fort Kearney 15 years ago. A night Gus would never forget, a night that still woke him screaming. Ezra left the blacksmith shop, stepped into the afternoon sun. Wade Sterling was still there, still drunk, still looking for the fight he had been denied. Their eyes met. For 3 heartbeats the street held its breath. Then Ezra Thorne walked away, not from fear, but from something deeper, a weariness, the knowledge that violence solved nothing, that killing Wade Sterling would be easy and meaningless. 2 days passed. Ezra stayed in a camp 5 miles outside town, up in the rocks where he could see anyone coming. He came into Fort Laramie only twice, once for ammunition, once for supplies. The second time he walked into Hayes General Store. Maddie was alone, counting inventory in the back. Her father had gone to the bank. The bell above the door chimed. The light in the room seemed to dim as the stranger filled the doorway. "Need supplies?" His voice made her jump, deep, rough, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. What kind of supplies? Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, .45-70 caliber. Maddie nodded. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved to the shelves. She felt clumsy, painfully aware of her size in the narrow aisles, aware of how her dress strained at the seams, how her breathing sounded loud in the quiet store. She reached for a tin of coffee on a high shelf, had to stretch. The shelf was just beyond her fingertips. "Let me." He was there, right behind her. His arm reached over her shoulder, brushed against her. She smelled pine resin and leather, felt the heat radiating from his body like a forge. He grabbed the tin effortlessly, set it on the counter. "Thank you." She kept her head down. "I am sorry I am too big to reach." Ezra Thorne stopped packing supplies. He looked at her, really looked at her, his gray eyes steady and patient. "You carry too much." Maddie flinched. "I know. I am sorry. I have tried to lose weight, but I just cannot seem to." "Not the weight." Ezra's voice cut through her apology. "You carry their words. Drop them. They weigh more than fat." Maddie froze. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. No mockery, no pity, just observation, like commenting on the weather. "Why would you say that?" Ezra continued packing his supplies. "I commanded 50 men once. The heaviest one survived the longest. The lightest died first. In the mountains, weight is strength. Here too. Here people do not think that way. Then they are fools." Before Maddie could respond, the door banged open. Mayor Sterling, Sheriff Thorne, Wade, 3 deputies. They filled the small store like floodwater. "That is him." Wade pointed at Ezra with a manicured finger. "That is the one who robbed the payroll wagon." The accusation hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Ezra did not flinch, did not reach for the heavy Colt revolver on his hip, though Maddie saw his hand twitch. A reflex, the muscle memory of survival. "You are making a mistake." Maddie's voice surprised her. It came out steady, stronger than she felt. "He has been here for 10 minutes. He could not have robbed any wagon." "Shut your mouth, girl," Mayor Sterling snapped. His face was like a dried apple, wrinkled and bitter. "Adults are talking." Sheriff Eris Cobb was a nervous man, 40 years old, thin mustache, eyes that never quite met yours. He pulled his gun, a Remington revolver. His hand shook slightly. "Hands up, Thorne. Do not make this messy." Ezra looked at Maddie, saw the fear in her eyes. Not for herself, for him. He calculated the odds in 3 seconds. 5 men with guns, Maddie in the crossfire. If he started shooting, she would die. He slowly raised his hands. They pistol-whipped him anyway. Wade Sterling struck him across the temple with the butt of his revolver. The brass cracked against bone. Ezra went down on one knee. Blood trickled into his beard. But he did not make a sound, did not cry out, just took the blow like he had taken 1,000 before. They dragged him out into the street. News traveled fast in Fort Laramie. By the time they hauled Ezra to the central square, a crowd had gathered. 300 people, hungry for justice, or at least hungry for a show. The Sterlings had been skimming the town budget for years, A public whipping was a great way to distract the populace from the empty treasury, from the missing gold, from the uncomfortable questions. Mayor Sterling stood on a crate, his voice carried across the square. "This man is a thief. He preys on honest folk. He steals from hard-working people trying to build a life in this territory. He is innocent." Maddie pushed through the crowd, her apron still dusted with flour. "He was at the smithy when the wagon was robbed. Ask Gus Brennan." The crowd turned to look at her. Laughter rippled through them like wind through wheat. "Go home, Maddie," a woman shouted from the back. "Go eat a pie and hush up." He was at the smithy. Maddie used her size to part the sea of bodies. Ask the blacksmith. He could not have done it. Gus Brennan stood at the edge of the crowd, his face pale. He looked down at his boots. He owed Mayor Sterling money. $300 borrowed to pay for medicine when his wife had consumption. She died anyway. The debt remained. Gus opened his mouth, closed it, said nothing. C. Wade grinned. "No alibi. Tie him up." They dragged Ezra Thorne to the whipping post, a thick timber buried deep in the earth, stained dark from years of use. Blood and sweat soaked into the wood grain, a permanent record of Fort Laramie's justice. They stripped him of his fur coat, his buckskin shirt. The crowd went silent. Ezra's back was a map of violence. Scars from bear claws ran diagonal across his shoulder blades. Knife wounds, old bullet holes, the puckered marks of burns. His body was built of muscle and trauma. Each scar a story, each story ending in survival. They lashed his wrists high above his head, secured the rope tight. Mayor Sterling climbed back on his crate. 20 lashes. For theft and resisting arrest. Then we hold him for the circuit judge. Wade Sterling grabbed the whip, a dozen strands of braided leather, 6 feet long, tipped with a popper that could crack a board in half. He was eager. This was his chance. To show the town he was tough, to break the mountain man who had ignored him, to prove he was more than his father's disappointing son. "Do not do this," Maddie screamed, but 2 deputies grabbed her arms, held her back. Ezra rested his forehead against the wood, breathed slow, preparing for pain. He had survived worse. He had survived blizzards that froze elk in their tracks, survived ambushes and knife fights and falls that should have killed him. He would survive this dandy and his toy. The first lash struck, crack, like a rifle shot in the square. Ezra's muscles seized. A red welt bloomed instantly across his shoulder blades. He did not cry out, just pressed his forehead harder against the post. Crack! The second lash, a grunt escaped him, involuntary. The pain was white-hot, nerve-ending screaming. Crack! The third cut skin. Blood began to run, dark red rivulets down his back. Wade was enjoying it, putting his shoulder into each swing, laughing breathlessly between strikes. "Not so tough now, are you? Where is your growl bear man?" By the 10th lash, Ezra's knees were buckling. The pain was beyond description, beyond anything he had felt since Fort Kearny, since the night 47 men died screaming his name. His vision blurred, consciousness slipping like sand through fingers. Wade stepped back, wiped sweat from his brow. He is barely conscious. Boring. Let us wake him up. He turned the whip around, held the heavy wooden handle like a club, aimed for the back of Ezra's head. A killing blow. No. It happened in a blur. The deputies holding Maddie had relaxed, watching the show. Maddie Hayes, fueled by a rage she did not know she possessed, shoved them aside. She did not run. She charged. 220 pounds moving at full speed. The momentum of a freight train. She threw herself between Wade and the bound, bleeding man. But Wade had already started his swing, not with the handle, bringing the lash back around for one more vicious strike, aimed at Ezra's neck, a place that would kill. Maddie turned her back to Wade, to shield Ezra, wrapped her large arms around the mountain man's waist, buried her face in his bloody side. The whip screamed through air. It did not hit Ezra. It wrapped around Maddie's back. The tip dug deep into the soft flesh of her shoulder, ripped downward across her dress, shredding fabric and skin beneath. The sound was wet and heavy. Maddie did not scream. She shrieked, a sound of pure agony that tore through the square like a living thing. That ripped through 300 souls and showed them what they had become. She collapsed, her weight dragging down on Ezra's bound arms, her blood mingling with his, running together, red and dark in the October sun. The crowd went instantly silent. Hitting a man, a drifter, a stranger accused of theft, that was justice. That was the law of the frontier. Whipping a woman, even an outcast like Maddie Hayes, even a fat girl, the town mocked, that was a violation so severe it stopped time. Wade Sterling stood there, the bloody whip trailing in the dust, his face draining of color like water from a broken bucket. She got in the way. It is her fault. The fat cow got in the way. Ezra Thorne opened his eyes. The pain in his back was gone, replaced by a cold, dark void, an emptiness that had lived inside him since Fort Kearny, since the night he followed orders and became a monster. He felt the warm blood of the woman on his legs, heard her whimpering against the post. Soft, broken, the sound of innocence destroyed. He lifted his head. He did not look at the crowd, did not look at Wade. He looked at the rope binding his wrists. Hemp fiber, strong, but not strong enough. He pulled. It was not a human pull. It was the torque of an animal that realizes it will die if it does not escape. His biceps bulged, veins looked ready to burst through skin. The post creaked, the rope groaned. Snap! The rawhide strip holding his right wrist gave way. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the silence. People flinched. Ezra freed his other hand, did not rub his wrists, did not check his wounds. He dropped to his knees, gently, surprisingly gently placed a hand on Maddie's trembling shoulder. Easy. His voice shook with a fury that vibrated the ground. Easy now. He stood up, turned to face Wade Sterling. Wade dropped the whip, took a step back. Now look, Thorne, it was an accident. I did not mean to. Ezra Thorne took one step forward. The entire town of Fort Laramie held its breath. They expected him to roar, to tackle Wade Sterling, to beat him to death in the square. But Ezra did something much more terrifying. He picked up Maddie Hayes in his arms. She was a heavy woman, mocked for her size her entire life, a burden to everyone. Ezra Thorne lifted her as if she were made of feathers, held her against his chest, her blood soaking his bare skin, mixing with his own. Two people bleeding as one. He looked at Mayor Sterling, looked at Sheriff Cobb, looked at Wade Sterling. You had your turn. His voice was low, but it carried to the back of the crowd, carried to every window, every doorway, every hiding place. Pray to your God, because I am coming back. Pause. 3 seconds of absolute silence. And when I do, I am not taking the fort. I am taking souls. He turned, walked toward the doctor's house, carrying Maddie through the parted crowd. No one moved to stop him. No one dared. They stepped aside like the Red Sea before Moses. Mayor Sterling stood on his crate, face white as bone. For the first time in 15 years, Harrison Sterling felt fear, real fear, because he knew who Ezra Thorne was, what Ezra Thorne had done. This was the butcher of Fort Kearny, the man who killed 47 of his own men in a single night, and Sterling had just given him a reason to kill again. But the crowd did not know that. They only knew they had just watched something change, something fundamental. They had watched a woman throw herself in front of death for a stranger, and they had watched that stranger carry her like she was precious. Maddie Hayes did not know that in 3 days this moment would become legend, that people would tell this story for generations, that her name would be whispered with reverence instead of mockery. She only knew pain, and the smell of pine resin and leather, and the feeling of being carried for the first time in her life, not as a burden, but as something worth saving. Ezra Thorne kicked open the door to Dr. Samuel Reed's surgery. The old physician was cleaning instruments. He looked up, saw the mountain man covered in blood, saw the woman bleeding in his arms. Dear God, put her down. Gently, gently. Reed cleared his examination table with a sweep of his arm. Glass jars and metal instruments clattered to the floor. Ezra laid Maddie on the cold leather. She was drifting in and out of consciousness, her face pale against her dark hair, beads of sweat on her forehead. "I need to cut the dress off." Reed's hands shook as he reached for shears. "And I need whiskey. A lot of it. For her. Maybe for me too." Ezra did not move to leave. He stood at the head of the table, a towering shadow in the dim lamplight, his own back still raw, blood drying in streaks down to his denim breeches, but he seemed unaware of his own pain. "You should not be here," Maddie mumbled. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with shock. "They will come for you. Let them come." It was the first time Ezra had spoken since the square. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Dr. Reed began cutting away fabric. When he peeled back the last layer, even the hardened physician hissed in a breath. The whip had done terrible work. The leather had chewed deep into muscle. A jagged, ugly valley across her shoulder blade. It would scar badly, would ache in the cold for the rest of her life. "Maddie." Reed held up a bottle of amber liquid. "Drink this. All of it." She choked it down, coughing as fire burned her throat. Ezra reached out. A hand that could snap a wolf's neck gently wiped a drop of whiskey from her chin. The stitching was brutal. There was no ether in Fort Laramie, only whiskey and grit. Maddie bit down on a leather strap Reed gave her. She screamed into it, muffled agonizing sounds that tore at the silence of the room. Every time she screamed, Ezra flinched. The man who had taken 20 lashes without a sound looked like he was being torn apart by her pain. He took her hand in his. His hand completely engulfed hers. Rough, calloused, a tool of survival. But his grip was an anchor. Maddie held on like a drowning woman. It took an hour. By the end, Maddie had passed out from the exhaustion of pain. Dr. Reed wiped his bloody hands on a rag, poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. He looked at Ezra Thorne. "She will live. The scar will be ugly. But she is built strong, stronger than any of those porcelain dolls prancing around the boardwalk." Ezra looked down at her sleeping face. The shame that usually clouded her features was gone, replaced by a slack peacefulness. Why did she do it? It was a genuine question. In his world, you looked out for yourself. Self-sacrifice was a quick way to die. Dr. Reed sighed, sat heavily on a stool. This town has spent 24 years telling Maddie Hayes she is worthless space. Today she decided to prove them wrong, by saving a man they deemed even more worthless. He took a drink, and because she has a heart the size of the territory, and this town does not deserve her. Ezra ran a thumb over Maddie's knuckles. "They hurt her to get to me. They hurt her because they enjoy it." Reed met his eyes. "Wade Sterling is a vicious little cur whose daddy owns the kennel. The mayor is skimming off Union Pacific contracts. They needed a show today." "You were just convenient." Ezra's eyes narrowed. The cold gray stones turned almost black. "They used her pain for a distraction. That is about the size of it." Ezra gently released Maddie's hand, walked to the window, looked out at the darkening street. Saloons were starting to light up. Piano music drifted on the cold wind. It all looked so normal, so civilized. "Doctor." Ezra did not turn around. "Keep her safe tonight. If anyone comes through that door that is not me, you shoot them." Reed opened a drawer, pulled out an old Navy Colt revolver, placed it on the desk. "Where are you going?" Ezra turned. The look on his face made the doctor shiver. It was the look of a man who had decided to stop being prey. "I need my rifle, and I need to go hunting." Ezra Thorne did not go back to the town square. He melted into the shadows between buildings, moving with a silence that defied his size, a skill learned in high country where sound carried for miles, where a snapped twig meant death. He retrieved his gear from where the sheriff's deputies had dumped it behind the jailhouse. They had taken his money, taken his knife, but they had foolishly left his Sharps buffalo rifle. They deemed it too heavy, too clumsy for a town fight. They were wrong. Ezra rode his roan gelding out of Fort Laramie, 5 miles into the rocks, to a hidden cache he maintained in a limestone cave. The kind of place a man keeps when he knows running might become necessary at any moment. Inside the cave he dressed his own wounds, bear grease and pine tar, the old ways that burned like hellfire but kept infection out. He bound his ribs tight with strips of cloth. Every breath hurt, every movement pulled at torn skin. He swapped his town clothes for full winter gear, heavy furs, moccasins lined with wool, a bandolier of massive .45-70 cartridges, each one capable of dropping a buffalo at 800 yards. When he emerged from that cave, he was not just Ezra Thorne anymore. He was something ancient, primal. He was the thing the Cheyenne whispered about in the high passes, the ghost that walked through blizzards, the man who could not be killed because he had already died inside. Ezra sat on a flat rock outside the cave. The sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in colors of blood and gold. He cleaned his rifle, methodical, patient, each movement practiced 10,000 times. And as he worked, the memories came. They always came at sunset. 15 years dissolved like sugar in water. Suddenly it was not 1874. It was 1859. And Ezra Thorne was not a haunted drifter. He was Lieutenant Ezra Thorne, 23 years old, United States Army, scout commander at Fort Kearny. He had a wife then, Sarah Thorne, 21 years old, hair the color of wheat in August, a laugh that could make him forget the weight of command. She was small, delicate, everything the frontier tried to break, but she was strong in ways the land could not touch. They had a daughter, Emma, 3 years old, curly hair, gap-toothed smile. She called him Papa, the only person who could make the hard Lieutenant Thorne get down on his hands and knees to play horsey. They lived in a small cabin near the fort. Nothing fancy, log walls, dirt floor, but it was home. It was everything. Ezra remembered the last time he saw them. December 7th, 1859. He was leading a patrol, 50 men under his command. A mission from General Sherman himself. Intelligence said the Cheyenne were planning to ambush a weapons convoy. Ezra's job was to take his men into the canyon between two ridges, set a trap, catch the Cheyenne in a crossfire. He kissed Sarah goodbye. She stood in the doorway, Emma on her hip, both of them waving. "Come back safe," Sarah said. "Always do," he replied. He lied. The patrol left at dawn. 50 men, good men. Men who trusted Lieutenant Thorne with their lives. Men who followed orders without question. They rode into the canyon, set up positions, waited for the Cheyenne. But the Cheyenne never came. Instead, at 3:47 in the afternoon, Ezra received new orders, delivered by a rider from General Sherman. The orders were simple: evacuate immediately, leave the canyon, return to fort. Ezra did not question. A soldier follows orders. He gave the command. His men began to withdraw. Then he heard it. Gunfire, not from the canyon, from the fort, 5 miles away. Too far to see, but close enough to hear. The rapid crack of rifles, the deeper boom of a cannon. Ezra made a decision. He split his force, sent 47 men back through the canyon, took 3 men with him, rode hard for the fort. It was the right tactical decision. Get help to the fort fast. Trust the bulk of his men to follow the withdrawal route. It was also the decision that haunted him every night for 15 years. By the time Ezra reached Fort Kearny, it was over. The attack had been brief, brutal. Bandits, not Cheyenne. They hit fast, killed anyone who resisted, took what they wanted, disappeared. Ezra found his cabin burning, smoke rising black against the winter sky. He jumped from his horse before it stopped moving, ran through the door. Sarah was on the floor, throat cut, blood pooled around her like a terrible halo. Emma was in the bedroom. Same wound, same pool, both of them cold. Ezra Thorne did not scream, did not cry. He knelt between them, held his wife's hand, his daughter's hand, and something inside him cracked, not broke, cracked, like ice on a frozen lake, still whole on the surface, but shattered underneath. Joseph Hayes found him there an hour later. Hayes was the only soldier who stayed at the fort that day, sick with fever, unable to ride. He tried to fight the bandits, tried to protect the families, but there were too many. He watched them kill his own wife, watched them threaten his baby daughter. They told him if he talked, if he went to the law, they would come back and finish the job. Hayes said nothing, buried his wife, raised his daughter alone, lived with the guilt and the fear. Ezra barely remembered the next 24 hours. He remembered writers coming in, reporting that the canyon had collapsed, a rock slide, massive. The 47 men he sent back through were trapped, dead, crushed under tons of stone, no survivors. Except the rock slide was not natural. It was triggered by the same bandits who hit the fort. They needed the soldiers out of the way, needed the fort vulnerable. So they set charges, waited for the patrol to enter the canyon, brought the walls down. 47 men died following Ezra's orders. His wife and daughter died while he was away following orders. The army investigated, called it a tragedy, bad intelligence, bad luck. The bandits were never caught. The case went cold. General Sherman personally told Ezra he had done nothing wrong, that splitting the force was the right call, that no one could have predicted the rock slide. But Ezra knew better. He knew that if he had kept his men together, if he had gone through the canyon with them, maybe he could have seen the charges. Maybe he could have stopped it. Or maybe he would have died with them. Either way, 47 men were dead. His family was dead. And Ezra Thorne was alive. He resigned his commission, took his rifle, rode into the mountains, and did not come back. For 15 years he lived in the high country, alone, trapping, hunting, surviving, becoming more animal than man. The Cheyenne saw him sometimes, called him Ghost Walker, left him alone. Even they could sense the death that clung to him like a second skin. Ezra never learned who led the bandits, never learned who gave the orders. The army closed the case, moved on, wars to fight, territories to claim. 47 dead soldiers and 2 dead civilians were just numbers in a ledger. But now sitting outside his cave in 1874, Ezra Thorne understood something. Mayor Harrison Sterling was the right age, the right type, a man who dealt in weapons, who had money with no clear source, who controlled Fort Laramie the way a bandit king controlled his territory. The pieces fit. 15 years ago, Sterling was a hardened criminal in his early 40s, already building his empire through blood and theft. Fort Kearny would have been a perfect target. Payroll, weapons, supplies, and Ezra had been in his way. Sterling set the trap, lured the patrol into the canyon, triggered the collapse, hit the fort while it was vulnerable, killed anyone who might identify him, including Sarah Thorne, including Emma Thorne. Ezra's hands stopped moving. The rifle cleaning rag hung limp in his fingers. His breathing slowed, deepened. The cold rage that had simmered for 15 years began to boil. He had come to Fort Laramie by accident, just to stop for supplies, a place to rest before pushing deeper into the mountains. He had not known Sterling was here, had not known this was the man he had been hunting in his nightmares. But now he knew, and now Sterling had made a mistake. He had hurt Mattie Hayes, a woman who reminded Ezra of Sarah, not in looks, in spirit, in the quiet strength that the world tried to crush. Ezra stood, strapped his knife to his leg, loaded the sharps, checked his Colt revolver. 6 rounds. He had killed men with less, but he would not kill Sterling tonight. Not yet, because killing Sterling was not enough. Sterling had built an empire on blood. Ezra would tear that empire down brick by brick, make Sterling watch everything he built turn to ash, make him feel the loss, the helplessness. Then Ezra would kill him. He knew from overheard conversations at the smithy that Sterling was moving stolen goods tonight, Union Pacific surveying equipment, worth thousands, being shipped east to Omaha, moving through Chimney Rock Canyon to avoid the main trail patrols. Ezra rode hard, cutting across open prairie under a freezing moon. He reached the canyon 2 hours ahead of the wagon train. The canyon was a narrow throat of red rock, shadowed, deadly. Wind howled through it like lost souls. Ezra stood in the middle of the trail. He did not hide. He began to gather wood. By the time the lead wagon lumbered around the bend, its lanterns swinging wildly in the wind, Ezra had built a bonfire right in the center of the pass. The flames leaped 10 feet high, casting dancing, terrifying shadows against the canyon walls, making one man look like a demon army. The wagon convoy ground to a halt. 3 wagons, 6 outrider guards. Leading them, bundled in a sheepskin coat and looking miserable, was Wade Sterling. His father had sent him on this run, to toughen him up after his embarrassing display with the whip. "What in hell is this?" Wade yelled over the wind. His voice cracked, fear and cold and trying to sound brave. "Who is there? Move that fire." A figure stepped out from behind the flames. Ezra Thorne stood bathed in firelight, looking 8 feet tall in his furs, holding the massive Sharps rifle casually across his chest. He did not say a word, just stood there, an undeniable obstruction. "It is the Bear Man," one of the guards whispered. His horse danced nervously beneath him, sensing the predator. "Christ, it is him! Damn it, Thorne!" Wade tried to sound authoritative, failed completely. "Get out of the road. You are a wanted man. I have got 6 guns here." Ezra slowly raised the Sharps, did not aim at Wade, aimed past him, at the lead wagon driver, a man in a wool coat hunched against the cold. Boom! The roar of the buffalo gun was deafening in the confined space. The lead driver's hat flew off his head, a clean hole punched through the crown. The man yelped, dove off the wagon seat, scrambled into the rocks like a frightened rabbit. The horses screamed, reared, chaos erupted. The guards pulled their pistols, fired wildly at the figure by the fire. Muzzle flashes lit the canyon like lightning. Bullets kicked up dirt around Ezra. One tugged at the fur of his coat. He did not move, did not flinch. He calmly cracked the breech of the Sharps, ejected the smoking brass casing, slid a new cartridge in. The metallic clack-clack of the reload was a sound of pure terror to the men facing him, because they knew what that sound meant. He had already proven he could hit what he aimed at. Next time he would not miss on purpose. "Next one takes a leg off." Ezra's voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind and the gunfire like a knife through silk. "Leave the wagons. Walk away. Live." The guards looked at Wade. They were hired guns, loyal only to money. They were not paid enough to fight a ghost with a cannon. "Shoot him, you cowards!" Wade screamed, his voice breaking like a pubescent boy. The guard closest to Wade spat tobacco juice on the ground, holstered his gun, turned his horse around. "This ain't my fight, Sterling. Your daddy did not pay me to die in a canyon." One by one, the other 5 guards turned, rode back the way they came, leaving Wade Sterling alone with 3 wagons full of stolen goods and a mountain man who looked like death personified. Wade sat on his shivering horse, stared across the fire at the man he had whipped hours earlier. The bravado drained out of him, left only the spoiled, frightened child beneath. Ezra walked around the fire, slow, deliberate, each step measured. He grabbed the bridle of Wade's horse, jerked the animal still, looked up at the mayor's son. Wade Sterling's eyes were wide, white all around like a spooked horse. "Please," Wade's teeth chattered, not from cold, from fear. "My father, he will pay you, whatever you want. Your father has nothing I want." Ezra reached up, grabbed the front of Wade's expensive sheepskin coat, ripped him out of the saddle like plucking an apple from a tree, threw him onto the hard-packed dirt. Wade scrambled backward on his hands and feet. "You are going to kill me." "No." Ezra walked past Wade to the lead wagon, pulled a burning brand from the bonfire, tossed it into the canvas covering. The dry fabric caught instantly. Fire spread like water, consuming. He moved down the line, torching all 3 wagons. The surveying equipment inside began to burn, brass theodolites melting, expensive telescopes warping in the heat, wooden tripods turning to charcoal, thousands of dollars, the Sterling's safety net, their insurance, going up in smoke. Ezra walked back to where Wade was cowering in the dirt, illuminated by the inferno of his father's future. The smell of burning canvas and wood smoke filled the air. The heat was intense, like standing too close to a forge. Ezra crouched down. They were eye level now. He could see Wade's pupils, dilated with terror, could smell the boy's fear. Acrid. Animal. You hurt her. Ezra's voice was like grinding stones. You drew her blood because you were small and wanted to feel big. Do you feel big now? Wade? Wade shook his head desperately. Tears streamed down his freezing face. Snot ran from his nose. He looked pathetic. Good. Ezra stood up. Go back to your father. Tell him the mountain man is not gone. Tell him I am just clearing the brush before I burn down the house. He turned his back on the sobbing man, started to walk toward his horse, then stopped. One more thing, Wade. He looked back over his shoulder. The firelight made his eyes glow, made him look like something from a nightmare. Tell him Maddie Hayes sends her regards. Ezra rode into the darkness, left Wade Sterling sobbing in the dirt, left the Sterling fortune burning bright against the Black Canyon walls. The war for Fort Laramie had begun. But Ezra did not ride back to town, not yet. He had one more stop to make, one more truth to uncover, because something Dr. Reed said was bothering him. The way Reed looked at him, the recognition in the doctor's eyes. Reed knew who Ezra was, which meant Reed had been at Fort Kearney, which meant Reed knew what happened that night. Ezra needed to know how much the doctor knew, and whether Reed was a threat. He circled back to Fort Laramie, approached from the east, tied his horse a quarter-mile out, moved through the darkness on foot, silent as smoke. Dr. Reed's surgery was dark except for one lamp burning in the back room, where Maddie slept. Ezra climbed through the window. Reed sat in a chair beside her bed, the Navy Colt on the table within reach. He looked up as Ezra's shadow filled the window frame. I wondered if you would come back tonight. Reed's voice was steady, not surprised, not afraid, just tired. Is she stable? She is sleeping. Fever is down. Pulse is strong. She will make it. Ezra nodded, stepped into the room, closed the window behind him, moved to the other side of Maddie's bed, looked down at her sleeping face, peaceful despite the pain she must be in. You know who I am. Ezra's statement, not a question. Yes. Were you there? Fort Kearney? I was the medic. Reed poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across the small table toward Ezra. I counted the bodies. 47 men crushed in that canyon. I helped bury them. Ezra took the whiskey, did not drink it, just held it. Why did you not say anything in the store? Because I also saw what you tried to do after. Reed met his eyes. I saw you ride back into that canyon, dig through the rocks with your bare hands until they bled, trying to find survivors, screaming their names until your voice gave out. The memory hit Ezra like a fist. He had forgotten that part, or tried to. The hours spent clawing at stone, the desperate hope that maybe someone was alive underneath, the crushing realization that they were all dead, all of them. You followed orders, Reed continued. That rockslide was not your fault. Orders. Ezra's laugh was bitter. You know whose orders? General Sherman's. Ezra looked at him sharply. How do you know that? Because 15 years is a long time to keep a secret. Reed took a drink. And because yesterday I received a telegram from an old friend in the Army, warning me that Ezra Thorne might be heading this way, and that certain people would prefer he not reach his destination alive. Who sent the telegram? Reed hesitated, then reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a piece of paper, handed it to Ezra. The telegram was brief, unsigned, but the message was clear. Thorne heading your direction. Stop. Sterling knows who he is. Stop setup in progress. Stop. Fort Kearney. Truth must stay buried. Stop. Ezra read it twice, then looked at Reed. Sterling knows about Fort Kearney. He was there. Reed's voice was quiet. Harrison Sterling was the bandit leader who hit the fort, who set the charges in the canyon, who killed your wife and daughter. The room went very still, very cold. Ezra's hand crushed the telegram into a ball. How long have you known? I suspected for years. Confirmed it 6 months ago. Sterling got drunk in the saloon, bragged to Wade about a big score from 15 years back. I overheard. Put the pieces together. Why did you not tell anyone? Who would I tell? Reed's voice rose slightly. The sheriff is on Sterling's payroll. The army wants Fort Kearny buried, and I am a deserter, Ezra. I left Fort Kearny 3 months after the massacre. Could not handle it anymore. Changed my name. Moved here. If the army finds me, I hang. They sat in silence. 2 men broken by the same night. 2 survivors of something that should have killed them. There is more. Reed refilled his glass, drank it in one swallow. Sterling was not working alone. He had a partner in the army, someone feeding him information, someone who told him when the patrol would be in the canyon, when the fort would be vulnerable. Who? Reed shook his head. I do not know. The telegram did not say. But whoever it is, they are high-ranking, high enough to make Fort Kearny disappear from official records. Ezra stood, walked to the window, looked out at the dark street, processing. Everything he thought he knew was shifting. Fort Kearny was not just a tragedy, it was a conspiracy. Sterling did not just kill 47 men, he had help from inside the army. Someone gave him the information, the timing, the opportunity, which meant someone in the United States Army was responsible for Sarah's death, for Emma's death, for 47 men crushed under stone, and they wanted Ezra dead to keep that secret buried. Maddie stirred in her sleep, whimpered softly. Ezra turned, walked to her bedside, gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Does she know about her mother? She knows her mother was killed by bandits, but not that it was Sterling. Joseph made her promise never to ask, never to investigate. He was protecting her by keeping her in the dark. Sometimes the dark is safer than the light. Ezra looked at Reed. Not anymore. Sterling showed his hand today. He set me up because he is scared, which means he knows I am a threat, which means the secret is not as buried as he thinks. What are you going to do? Ezra picked up the Sharp's rifle, checked the load. I am going to do what I should have done 15 years ago. I am going to finish this. By killing Sterling. Ezra paused at the window, looked back at the doctor, at Maddie sleeping between them. By burning his world down, then killing him. He climbed out the window, disappeared into the night, left Reed sitting alone with his whiskey and his secrets. Outside, snow began to fall, the first snow of winter, soft and silent and covering everything in white, burying the dirt and the blood and the sins of Fort Laramie under a blanket of false purity. But nothing stayed buried forever, and the truth, like bones in shallow graves, had a way of working itself to the surface. Ezra Thorne was coming for Harrison Sterling, and when he came, he would bring 15 years of rage with him, 47 ghosts screaming for justice, a wife and daughter crying out from unmarked graves, and Fort Laramie would burn. 3 days after the whipping, Fort Laramie had transformed from a town into a prison. Mayor Sterling declared martial law. Saloons closed at sundown, curfews enforced with rifle butts. Armed patrols walked the streets every hour. Anyone out past dark was detained, questioned, sometimes beaten. The town that once mocked Maddie Hayes now whispered her name with something approaching reverence. They had seen her blood, seen her throw herself between death and a stranger, and that act had shamed them in ways they could not articulate. But shame does not always lead to courage. Most of Fort Laramie kept their heads down, went about their business, pretended not to notice the deputies searching houses, pretended not to hear the screams from the jailhouse when Sterling's men interrogated suspects. Dr. Samuel Reed was exhausted. He had been tending to Maddie, trying to keep Ezra's presence a secret, a task that was becoming impossible. The walls were closing in. You have to go, Reed told Ezra on the 3rd evening. They are searching house to house. They will be here by morning. Ezra was cleaning his Sharp's rifle. The smell of gun oil filled the small cellar beneath Reed's surgery. If I leave, they take her. If you stay, they kill you both. Reed's voice was urgent, pleading. You cannot fight them head on. Sterling has 30 paid deputies now, more coming from Cheyenne. The town is locked down tight. Then I will unlock it. How Reed spread his hands. People are terrified. They saw what happened to Maddie. They know what Sterling will do to anyone who helps you. Ezra looked up from his rifle. His gray eyes were cold, calculating. People are terrified because they think they are alone. But they saw what happened today. They saw a woman dragged through snow. They just need a push toward what suicide number Ezra stood, toward remembering they outnumber Sterling 300-30. Before Reed could respond, the sound of shattering glass came from upstairs. Heavy boots stomped on the floorboards above their heads. Men's voices, rough, commanding. Search the place. Turn it over. That was Sheriff Cobb's voice. Ezra grabbed his rifle, muscles coiling, ready to fight. Number Reed put a hand on Ezra's chest. There are too many. If you start shooting from down here, they will burn the house with Maddie inside. Then what? Wait. Reed rushed up the cellar stairs, closed the trap door, threw a rug over it, straightened his vest, took a breath, opened the door to the main surgery. Sheriff Eris Cobb stood in the hallway with 4 deputies, all with drawn guns. But behind them were 5 new men. Strangers. They wore long dusters and low-brimmed hats, carried Winchester repeating rifles, moved with the easy, deadly grace of professional killers. The regulators had arrived. "What is the meaning of this?" Reed demanded, standing in his hallway, trying to sound outraged. "Not terrified. Harboring a fugitive." Sheriff Cobb spat. "Where is he? I have not seen Thorne since the whipping. I am treating a patient. That is all." One of the regulators pushed past the doctor, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Dead eyes, the kind of man who killed for money and slept fine after. He walked into the patient room where Maddie lay. Maddie was sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest, terrified. But her jaw was set. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not again. "Get up." The regulator's voice was flat, bored, like ordering coffee. "She cannot move." Reed protested, rushing in. "Her stitches will tear." The regulator backhanded Dr. Reed without looking at him. The old physician crumpled to the floor, dazed, blood from his split lip. The man grabbed Maddie by her arm, right over the wound, and yanked. Maddie screamed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. Fresh blood bloomed on the back of her nightdress. The stitches Reed had so carefully placed were tearing, opening. "We are taking her to the jail," the regulator announced. "Public enemy, accomplice to arson and theft." Number Reed tried to stand, got a boot to his ribs for the effort. They dragged Maddie out. She stumbled, her legs weak, her bare feet dragging in the snow that had fallen during the night. The cold bit into her skin, but the pain in her back was all-consuming, overwhelming. She did not mean to yell it, but it ripped out of her throat like something living. "Ezra, don't come. Run!" They hauled her down Main Street. Curtains twitched in windows. The townspeople watched, hidden and afraid. They saw Maddie Hayes, the woman who had carried their flour and swept their floors, being dragged through mud like a sack of grain. Some looked away, ashamed, but too scared to act. Others watched and felt something stir, something that had been sleeping, a memory of who they used to be, before Sterling, before the fear. They threw Maddie into the jail cell, not a room, a cage of iron bars in the center of the sheriff's office. She collapsed on the dirty floor, shivering violently, from cold, from pain, from terror. Mayor Sterling walked in, looked at her with pure contempt, his dried apple face twisted in something approaching pleasure. "Comfortable, Maddie." She did not answer, just pulled herself into a corner, made herself as small as possible. "You are going to stay here until your mountain man comes knocking." Sterling smiled. "And when he does, my new friends here will cut him to ribbons." He turned to the regulators. "Post men on the roof, men in the livery stable across the street. If a dog barks, shoot it." The trap was set. Maddie was the bait, and Ezra Thorne was the prey they were hunting. But from the ventilation grate of the doctor's cellar, Ezra had heard everything. Heard Maddie scream his name. Heard the blow that struck Reed. Heard the deputies laughing as they dragged her away. He did not burst out in rage. The red mist that descended on most men in battle did not come. Instead, a glacial calm settled over him. The same calm he felt right before Fort Kearny, right before following orders that killed 47 men. He waited until the heavy boots faded, waited until he heard Reed groaning upstairs. Then Ezra emerged from the cellar, helped the doctor into a chair, examined the split lip, the bruised ribs. They took her. Reed wheezed, wiping blood from his mouth. 10 men, maybe 12. 5 are professionals. You cannot take them head on. I know. Ezra walked to the window, looked at the jailhouse down the street. It was lit up like a lantern, a beacon, guards visible on the roof, more in the shadows, all of them watching, waiting. You cannot attack the jail, Reed warned. It is a fortress. It is suicide. Ezra turned. His face was a mask of death. I am not going to attack the jail. Then, what I am going to turn the town against them. How they are terrified. Ezra began gathering supplies from Reed's cabinets, a jar of kerosene, cotton bandages, matches, because people are terrified when they think they are alone, but they are not alone. There are 300 of them and 30 deputies. Reed watched him work. Where are you going? Ezra strapped his knife to his leg. The church, then Sterling's warehouse. Then I am going to ring the bell and wake this town up. At 3 in the morning, the silence of Fort Laramie shattered. The church bell rang, not the rhythmic toll of Sunday service, frantic, heavy, angry, the kind of ringing that meant fire or attack or the end of the world. Dong, dong, dong. Lights flickered on in houses. People stumbled to windows, confused, frightened. The regulators on the jailhouse roof spun around, aimed their rifles toward the church steeple at the far end of town. What the hell is that? Sheriff Cobb ran out into the street, in his nightshirt, gun in hand. It is a diversion. The head regulator, a man named Frank Griggs, shouted, "Stay on the girl. Keep eyes on the girl." But then a second sound joined the bell. An explosion. Not at the jail, not at the church. Mayor Sterling's private warehouse, located behind the general store, erupted in a fireball that turned night into day. Flames shot 60 feet into the air. The heat could be felt 3 blocks away. And then another explosion. The livery stable where Sterling kept his prize carriage horses blew its doors off. The horses had been freed moments before. They stampeded down Main Street, adding to the chaos, screaming, eyes rolling white with terror. He is destroying the town. Wade Sterling ran out of the saloon, where he had been drinking, trying to forget the canyon, the burning wagons, the mountain man who looked at him like he was already dead. But Ezra was not destroying the town. He was destroying Sterling's holdings, everything the mayor owned, everything he had built through blood and corruption. And in the chaos a voice boomed out. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off wooden buildings, carried by the wind. Fort Laramie. Ezra Thorne's voice was a roar. They took your daughter. They starve your children. They grow fat while you go hungry. Are you sheep or are you free men? For a moment, nothing happened. The town held its breath. Then a door opened. Joseph Hayes stepped out of his general store. He held a double-barreled shotgun, the same weapon he carried in the Mexican War 30 years ago. He had always been a coward after his wife died, but he had seen his daughter's blood in the snow, and something in him had broken, or maybe something had finally healed. Then the blacksmith stepped out, Gus Brennan, holding a heavy hammer, the muscles in his arms like iron. He had been too afraid to testify, too afraid to stand up, but he was a Fort Sumter veteran. He had faced Confederate artillery. He could face Sterling's hired thugs. Then the baker, the drovers, the shop owners, the farmers. One by one they emerged from their homes, holding whatever weapons they could find. Hunting rifles, axes, pitchforks, knives. They were not soldiers. They were not warriors. But they were 300 people who had lived in fear too long, and they had just been reminded that they outnumbered their oppressors. "Hold the line!" Sheriff Cobb screamed, ducking behind a water trough. "Shoot them! They are neighbors," a deputy yelled back, throwing down his badge. "I ain't shooting Gus Brennan. I owe him for my horse." The deputy ran, disappeared into an alley. Two more followed him. The hired guns looked at each other, calculating. They were paid to intimidate farmers, not to fight a mob. The regulators opened fire, but they were aiming at shadows, at movement. The townspeople scattered, used cover, fired back. It was chaos, uncoordinated, but it served Ezra's purpose. It pulled every eye outward, away from the jail. While the street erupted in gunfire and shouting, Ezra Thorne was at the back of the jailhouse. He had not used the door. He used a heavy logging chain attached to two draft horses, the same horses freed from Sterling's stable, spooked but controllable. He whipped the horses. They pulled. The chain went taut. The iron bars of the rear window groaned, then ripped clean out of the frame, taking a chunk of the wall with them. Bricks and mortar crumbled. Ezra stepped through the dust and debris into the sheriff's office. Wade Sterling was there, cowering in a corner. But standing between Ezra and Maddie's cell was Frank Griggs, the head regulator, fast, mean, holding a Winchester rifle pointed directly at Maddie's head through the bars. "Take another step, Bear Man." Griggs smiled, yellow teeth in the gloom, and the girl loses her face. Ezra stopped, his chest heaving. He was covered in soot and sweat and blood. His own back was still raw, but he seemed unaware of pain, focused entirely on the man threatening Maddie. "You should not be here," Maddie whispered from the cell, her eyes glassy with shock. "They will kill you. Let them try." It was the first time Ezra had spoken since the square. His voice was low, a rumble from deep in the earth. "Drop the rifle," Griggs commanded. "Kick it over." Ezra slowly lowered the Sharps buffalo gun, set it on the floor, his movements deliberate, controlled. He kicked it toward Griggs. "Smart. Now get on your knees." Wade get his knife. Wade Sterling, seeing Ezra unarmed, found courage, or what he thought was courage. He scrambled up, pulled a pearl-handled revolver from his belt. The gun was expensive, beautiful, more decoration than weapon. "I will kill him." Wade's voice shook. "I will do it myself." "Wait, you idiot," Griggs snapped, momentarily distracted by Wade's incompetence. That split second was all Maddie needed. She was hurt, exhausted, weak from blood loss and pain. But she was heavy, and she was close to the bars, and Frank Griggs was standing just inches from the cell door. Maddie lunged. She did not grab him with her hands. She threw her entire body weight against the iron door of the cell. The heavy gate slammed outward on its hinges. Wade had unlocked it earlier. To taunt her, to make her think she could escape before slamming it shut again. He had forgotten to lock it. The metal door collided with Griggs's shoulder with the force of a battering ram. 220 pounds of momentum behind cold iron. Griggs stumbled sideways, his aim ruined. The Winchester discharged into the ceiling. Splinters rained down. Ezra moved. He did not run. He exploded, covered the 10 feet between them before Griggs could recover. Ezra did not punch. He tackled, drove his shoulder into Griggs's chest, lifted the gunman off his feet, slammed him into the heavy oak desk. Bones snapped, ribs cracked like dry kindling. Griggs dropped the rifle, gasped for air, but he pulled a knife from his boot, slashed wildly, cut a deep line across Ezra's forearm. Blood welled, ran down to Ezra's hand. He did not even blink. He grabbed Griggs's wrist, twisted, another sickening crack. The knife clattered to the floor. Griggs opened his mouth to scream. Ezra silenced him with a single thunderous headbutt. Skull to skull. The sound was like an axe hitting wood. Griggs's eyes rolled back. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. Silence fell in the room, just the sound of Ezra's breathing, heavy, controlled, and Wade Sterling whimpering in the corner. Ezra turned slowly. Wade was trembling, holding his revolver with both hands, the barrel shaking so hard the sight was dancing all over the room. "Stay back," Wade shrieked. "I am the mayor's son. I own this town. You own nothing." Ezra stepped over Griggs's unconscious body. "You built a castle on sand, and the tide just came in. I will shoot." Wade squeezed his eyes shut, pulled the trigger. Click. His eyes snapped open. He pulled again. Click. Ezra stopped 1 foot away, reached out, gently took the gun from Wade's limp fingers like taking candy from a child, opened the cylinder. Empty. Wade in his panic and vanity had never reloaded after firing at tin cans that morning. He had been so eager to shoot Ezra, so certain of his own power, he had forgotten the most basic rule. A man who relies on fear forgets to check his iron. Ezra grabbed the front of Wade's expensive suit, did not hit him, did not kill him, just dragged him to the front door of the jailhouse, kicked it open. Outside, the shooting had stopped. The regulators, seeing the tide turn, had fled into the night. The townspeople stood in a semicircle, holding torches and weapons, their faces grim, determined. Mayor Harrison Sterling was being held by Gus Brennan, the blacksmith's iron grip on Sterling's collar. The mayor's face was pale as death. Ezra threw Wade down the stairs. The boy tumbled into the mud, landed at his father's feet. "Take them," Ezra's voice carried across the square. "They are yours." The townspeople surged forward, but Ezra did not wait for their justice, did not wait for the cheers or the thanks. He turned back into the jailhouse, walked to the cell. Maddie was sitting on the floor, holding her side, blood seeping through her nightdress where the stitches had torn. She looked up at him, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You came back," she sobbed. "You crazy fool, you came back." Ezra knelt, did not care about the blood, did not care about the open door or the people outside. He gathered her into his arms, buried his face in her neck, breathed in the smell of her, soap and pain and courage. "I told you." His voice was thick with emotion, shaking. "I don't leave my shield behind." For a moment they just stayed like that. Two broken people holding each other in a broken town, finding something in the wreckage that felt like hope. But then another voice cut through the moment. "Thorn." Ezra turned his head. Mayor Harrison Sterling stood in the doorway. He had broken free from Gus, grabbed Wade's Navy Colt from a deputy's belt. Now he held it, aimed at Ezra and Maddie. 15 years I have run from you." Sterling's voice shook, not from fear, from rage, from desperation. 15 years I have built this empire, and you come here and tear it down in 3 days. Maddie froze. "Fort Kearny," she whispered. "What is Fort Kearny?" "That is right, girl." Sterling's laugh was bitter. "I killed his wife, his little brat daughter, burned them alive in their cabin, and I would do it again." The words hung in the air like poison. "You." Maddie's voice was barely audible. "You killed his family and yours." Sterling was past caring now, past hiding. "Your mother was just in the wrong place, wrong time. She saw my face, had to die. Your father knew. I told him if he talked I would slit your throat in your sleep. He chose silence, chose your life over justice." Maddie's world tilted. Everything she thought she knew shattered. Her father had known, all these years, 14 years of silence, of fear, of watching his wife's killer become mayor. Ezra moved, stepped in front of Maddie, shielding her with his body. Sterling fired. Bang! The bullet hit Ezra's left shoulder, spun him. He twisted, kept Maddie behind him. Blood sprayed, hot, dark. Sterling fired again. Bang! Missed. The bullet struck the doorframe. Wood splintered. Ezra lunged forward, covered the distance in 3 strides. Sterling pulled the trigger again. Click. Empty. Only 2 bullets loaded in his panic. Ezra grabbed Sterling by the throat, lifted him off his feet. The old man's eyes bulged. His feet kicked uselessly in the air. "You took everything from me." Ezra's voice was barely human. A growl. "My Sarah. My Emma. 47 good men." Sterling choked, clawed at Ezra's hand. "I was young, needed money. It was just business. Just." Ezra slammed Sterling against the wall. The old man's head bounced off brick, dazed him. Ezra pulled back his fist, ready to drive it through Sterling's face, to crush his skull, to end this. Ezra. Maddie's voice, weak but firm. He stopped, fist cocked, every muscle trembling with the need for violence. Don't. She was pulling herself up, using the bars for support. If you kill him like this, you become him. I am already him. I killed 47 men, Maddie, followed orders and got them killed. You followed orders. Maddie took a step, winced, took another. You tried to save them. But this beating an old man to death, that is not justice. That is murder. He murdered my family. And mine. Maddie's voice broke. He murdered my mother. But if you kill him, he wins. He turns you into the monster he always said you were. Ezra looked at Maddie, then at Sterling gasping in his grip, then at his own hand, covered in blood. His blood, Sterling's blood, Maddie's blood, all mixed together. Slowly he lowered Sterling. Let him crumple to the floor. The townspeople will judge you. Ezra stepped back. And God will judge your soul. He turned away, walked to Maddie. She collapsed into his arms, and he carried her out of that jailhouse, out into the snow, past the townspeople who parted like water. Joseph Hayes stood there, Maddie's father, tears streaming down his face. He reached out as they passed. I am sorry. His voice cracked. I was trying to protect you. Maddie looked at him, her father, who had carried his own burden for 14 years, who had chosen her life over revenge. She did not speak, just reached out, squeezed his hand once. Then Ezra carried her away. Behind them the town took Sterling, dragged him to the jailhouse cell where he had held Maddie, locked the door, posted guards, and waited for the circuit judge to arrive. Harrison Sterling would hang 3 weeks later. Wade Sterling would follow him to the gallows. The regulators who fled would be hunted down. Justice, slow and imperfect, would come. But Ezra and Maddie were not there to see it. Winter came hard that year. Snow fell for 3 days straight after the uprising. Fort Laramie turned white, clean, like God was trying to wash away the blood. Maddie recovered slowly at Dr. Reed's surgery. Her wound was infected. Fever raged for a week. Ezra never left her side. He sat in a chair, held her hand through the shaking, the delirium, the nightmares. Reed changed her bandages twice a day, poured alcohol into the wound. Maddie screamed into a leather strap. Ezra flinched every time, like each scream was a blow. You love her, Reed said one night. Not a question, an observation. Ezra did not answer for a long time, just watched Maddie sleep, her face peaceful despite the fever. I don't know what love is anymore, he finally said. I thought I did, with Sarah, but that feels like another life, another man. So what is this debt? Ezra's voice was quiet. She threw herself in front of death for me. I owe her a life worth saving. Reed smiled, sad, knowing. That is what love is, son. Owing someone a debt you can never repay, and spending your life trying anyway. 3 weeks after the hanging, Maddie was strong enough to walk, to move without crying out. The scar on her back was angry red, raised. It would never fully fade, a permanent reminder of the day she chose courage over fear. The townspeople treated her differently now. No more mockery, no more laughter. They called her Miss Hayes, tipped their hats, offered to carry things for her. Maddie hated it. The reverence was as suffocating as the scorn had been. She was not a saint, not a hero, just a woman who made a choice. She could not stay in Fort Laramie. Too many ghosts, too many memories. Her father understood. Joseph Hayes had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. The guilt of his silence had eaten him alive. But he also looked lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Where will you go? He asked one morning. They were in the store, sorting inventory, pretending things were normal. Somewhere I can breathe. Maddie did not look at him. Somewhere people don't know my name. Joseph nodded, cleared his throat. The mountain man. Ezra. Are you going with him? Maddie paused, her hands stilling on a sack of flour. I don't know. He hasn't asked. He will. How do you know? Because I see the way he looks at you. Joseph's voice was gentle, like you are the only real thing in a world of ghosts. Maddie did not respond, but her heart beat faster. That night Ezra came to the store. He had been staying in the rocks, coming to town only after dark. He still did not trust the peace. "We need to talk," he said. They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The stars were bright, cold, the kind of stars you only see in winter. "I am leaving," Ezra said, "going back to the high country. The Big Horns. There is a valley up there. Hidden. Good water. Plenty of game." Maddie nodded, said nothing. "You should come with me." She looked at him, shocked. "What?" "You can't stay here. Every time you walk these streets you will see that square, that post, that blood. It will eat you alive. So will the mountains." Number Ezra turned to face her. "The mountains don't care what you look like, don't care what you weigh. They only care if you are strong enough to survive them." He paused, looked at her straight on. "And you are the strongest person I have ever met." Maddie felt tears prick her eyes. "I am not strong. I am scared. All the time." "Fear does not make you weak." Ezra's voice was certain. "I have seen strong men freeze in battle, seen them piss themselves and cry. Fear is just a feeling. Courage is what you do despite it." "What if I slow you down?" "You won't. What if winter comes and I can't keep up? Then I will carry you." He said it simply, like it was obvious, like there was no other option. Maddie looked at this man, this killer, this survivor, this person who had lost everything and somehow found a reason to keep breathing. "When do we leave 3 days?" They left Fort Laramie on a cold March morning. Ezra on his roan, Maddie on a sturdy mare Joseph bought for her. They had supplies, warm clothes, enough to last until they could set up properly. Joseph Hayes stood outside the store, watching his daughter ride away. He raised a hand. Maddie returned the gesture. No words, nothing that needed saying. The first weeks in the mountains were brutal. The cabin Ezra had described was there, but it was barely standing. Roof caved in, walls rotted. They spent 2 weeks rebuilding, cutting logs, hauling stones, chinking gaps with mud and moss. Maddie's hands blistered, then calloused. She learned to swing an axe, to fell a tree, to strip bark and notch logs. Her back ached constantly. The scar pulled with every movement. But she was not miserable. For the first time in her life, her size was an asset. She could lift, carry, haul. Things Ezra struggled with, she managed, and slowly she stopped apologizing for taking up space. Ezra taught her to shoot. The Sharps was too heavy, but a Winchester rifle fit her well. She learned to aim, to breathe, to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. By April she could hit a target at 200 yards. By May she brought down her first elk, watched it fall, felt the weight of taking a life, understood the responsibility. Ezra taught her to dress the kill, to waste nothing, to thank the animal for its sacrifice. The old ways, the ways that kept you humble. In return, Maddie taught Ezra to cook, really cook, not just roast meat over fire, but soups, stews, bread, things that took time and care. At first he was terrible, burned everything, but he was patient, willing to learn. And slowly the man who had lived on jerky and coffee for 15 years learned to make a meal worth savoring. They fell into a rhythm. Ezra hunted and chopped wood. Maddie cooked and maintained the cabin. They worked together in the garden, planting vegetables that would survive the short growing season. At night they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, often in silence, comfortable, the kind of quiet that comes from trust. It was not romantic, not yet. Ezra still slept outside most nights, under the stars, unable to handle walls and ceilings. Maddie understood, did not push. But slowly, inch by inch, they were healing. May brought unexpected danger. A man found their valley, one of Sterling's regulators who had escaped. He had been hunting Ezra, tracking rumors, following whispers. His name was Scars, real name forgotten. He was called that for the knife work on his face. Ezra was hunting 5 miles away when Scars found the cabin, found Maddie alone, chopping wood. He rode in slow, gun drawn, smiled when he saw her. "Where is he?" Maddie did not answer, just set down the axe, backed toward the cabin door. "Don't run, fat girl." Scars dismounted. "I am not here for you, but if you scream, I will gut you slow." Maddie's hand found the door latch. She had seconds. Ezra had taught her, drilled her, never freeze, never wait for rescue. She slammed the door, threw the bolt, ran to where the Winchester leaned against the wall, grabbed it, checked the load. Full. Scars kicked the door. Once, twice. The wood splintered, but it held. "Come out and I will make it quick." Maddie moved to the window, opened the shutter, rested the rifle barrel on the sill, aimed at the door, waited. The third kick shattered the door. Scars stepped through, gun raised. Maddie fired. Boom. The rifle kicked, hard, but she had braced, absorbed it. The bullet caught Scars in the right thigh. Bone shattered. He went down screaming, gun falling from his hand. Maddie worked the lever, ejected the brass casing, chambered a new round, stepped through the broken door. Scars was on the ground, clutching his leg, blood pumping between his fingers. He looked up, saw Maddie standing over him, Winchester aimed at his chest. "Wait." His voice was high, scared. "Please, I was just following orders." Maddie thought about that. About men following orders. About Ezra and Fort Kearney. About 47 men who died because someone above them made a choice. "I am giving you a choice." Her voice was steady. "Leave. Crawl if you have to. Get on your horse. Ride away. Never come back. Or I put the next bullet between your eyes." Scars stared at her. This fat girl he thought would be easy prey saw something in her eyes, something hard, unyielding. He crawled, slow, agonizing, made it to his horse, pulled himself into the saddle, rode away, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. When Ezra returned at sunset, he found Maddie sitting on the porch, the Winchester across her knees. She told him what happened, calm, matter of fact. Ezra looked at the blood trail, the shattered door, then at Maddie. "You let him live." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I am not you." Maddie met his eyes. "I don't carry 47 ghosts. I don't want to start." Ezra sat beside her, silent. Then he put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her close. "My shield," he whispered. "My mountain," she replied. And something shifted. Some final wall crumbled. That night, Ezra did not sleep under the stars. He slept in the cabin, in a bed, with Maddie beside him. Not touching, just present. Two people learning to be close without fear. Summer came. The valley bloomed. Wildflowers carpeted the meadow. Elk grazed in the mornings. Eagles circled overhead. Maddie's scar faded from angry red to pale pink. It still pulled, still ached in cold weather. But it was part of her now, a reminder of strength, of choice. Ezra's nightmares lessened, still came, but not every night. When they did, Maddie was there. She did not try to fix him, did not offer empty comfort, just held his hand, reminded him he was not alone. They built a life, small, quiet, far from civilization. They saw other people maybe twice a year, trappers passing through, prospectors looking for gold. News filtered in slowly. Fort Laramie was rebuilding. Joseph Hayes was mayor now. The town had elected him unanimously. Gus Brennan was sheriff. Dr. Reed was training an apprentice. The story of Ezra and Maddie had become legend. People told it around campfires, in saloons. A cautionary tale about standing up to tyrants, a love story about unlikely heroes. But the real Ezra and Maddie were not legendary. They were two damaged people learning to be whole. Learning that healing does not mean forgetting. It means choosing to keep living despite the scars. 6 months after leaving Fort Laramie on a clear October morning, Maddie stood on the cabin porch, looking out over the valley. The air was thin and sweet, smelling of pine sap and coming snow. She was still a large woman, always would be, 220 pounds of muscle and determination. But the heaviness in her spirit was gone. She no longer carried the weight of other people's cruelty. Ezra came up the path from the creek, a string of trout in his hand. He stopped when he saw her, dropped the fish on the chopping block, walked up the steps, did not say a word, just wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, rested his chin on her head. They stood like that for a long time, watching the sun paint the peaks in gold and violet. "Cold?" Ezra asked, his voice a low rumble against her back. Maddie leaned into him, feeling the solid, unshakable warmth of the man who had become her home. "Number." She smiled, watching the first star appear. "I am finally warm." And that is the story of Ezra Thorne and Maddie Hayes. In a world that told her she was too much and told him he was nothing but a killer, they found the only truth that matters. Loyalty is stronger than iron. Love is the only thing that can heal a scar. Fort Laramie eventually forgot the Sterlings. The town rebuilt, thrived, became a place where justice meant something again. But the story of the girl who took the whip, that story is still whispered in the Wyoming wind, told to children, passed down through generations, a reminder that true strength comes not from the body, but from the heart. And if you go to the Bighorn Mountains on a cold night, some say you can still see smoke rising from a hidden valley. Still hear laughter carried on the wind, the sound of two people who learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is standing up when the world tells you to kneel, loving when the world tells you that you are unworthy, and becoming a shield for someone else, even when you have been broken yourself. The mountain and the shield, forever bound by blood and choice and the kind of love that only comes from surviving hell together.